And we are live. Hi, you guys. Um, First off, I wanted to take this time to welcome you all to our panel discussion today. Thank you all for being here. I'm Samar Deanna McGee. I'm from Mississippi, class of 2020. The Task Force on Slavery, Segregation, and Racial Injustice by President Lee Bron is sponsoring today's event, which is Black at Rice, Remembering the Black Student Experience. And I know in lieu of current events, it's really important for us to take time to listen to each other, take time to share, and just feeling each other's experiences. And I think when it comes down to asking questions about how we can improve Rice and how we can make Rice a more diverse and inclusive space, which is what we all want, and which was originally what the charge of the task force was all about, taking that time to really share in those experiences and listen in those experiences is something that's very necessary. Hence today's event. I also just want to note that today's event is one of two panels on the Black student experience. Today's panel is made exclusively of Black Rice alums from, I think we have roughly one alum every decade since Rice integrated, which is a super diverse and representative panel. So I think that's something that makes it exciting. But we also have another panel, I think in about a week and a half, composed of current students, which I don't think you guys want to miss, to see the continuation of the narrative and the transformation of the Black student experience at Rice. So let's see. First off, I think I want to introduce you guys to our esteemed panelists. They are fun people, super diverse group, and I'll give them a brief introduction and then let them introduce themselves in more depth so that you guys can get to know them, who they are, what they're about, and that kind of thing. The first half of our discussion will be a moderated Q&A between myself and the panel. And the second half of our discussion, well, I'll say half, but second portion of our discussion will be where you all can submit questions to the panelists, and they can be specific or general questions. So let's hop right on into it. All right, so first off, we have Mr. Donald Bowers, who's a class of 1990. Second off, we have Akeem Bruce, who's class of 2019. Alicia Burns Wright, class of 2008. Craig Jackson, who will be participating in today's panel asynchronously. He's a law professor at TSU and he wasn't able to make it, but he did leave us a few video clips, which we'll incorporate into today's panel discussion. He's class of 1977. And then we have Jamila Mensah, who's class of 2000. And Ms. Jan West, who's class of 1973. So we can give it up to our panel. This is where I clap for myself and for you all. All right. I got distracted by the chat. This happens for me in real life too. So first off, I want to thank you all for being here. You guys didn't have to take out time in your day to come and talk about your Black experience at Rice, whether it was a year ago, whether it was 10 years ago, whether it was 20 years ago, and so on and so forth, but you did, so I'm super grateful. And even though I gave you all a brief introduction, I think it would be beneficial for us to hear a bit more about you so that we can really get to know you. I guess we can go down the line, starting with Ms. West, and you guys can tell us a bit more about yourselves, maybe just your name, where you're from, what you do for a living, your residential college, and maybe a hobby, so that we can really get to know who we're working with. I'll turn it over to you, Ms. West.
Okay, thank you. I'm Jan West. I'm the Assistant Director in Multicultural Community Relations in Public Affairs at Rice University. Our department, our team works to engage diverse members of the community, and we usually do about 100 events a year pre-COVID. Hopefully we'll come close to that. I'm a 1973 graduate of Rice. I resided in Brown College when I was a student, and I am a proud associate of Duncan College. Go Duncan right now. Since its inception, I am married, have 3 sons and a daughter and 8 grandchildren. I am a member of Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church, without whom and my faith I would not be getting through this crazy time. But I especially am proud of Rice because Rice recognized Pastor Emeritus Reverend Lawson because of his work in civil rights and justice. And if you don't know it already, there's going to be a grove near Herring Hall in his name, and we're looking forward to the plaque and celebrating with him. I am also on the task force of segregation, slavery, and racial injustice, and working with community outreach with that team. And finally, my husband and I thought about what do I do in my spare time? And so I guess I am former board member of NAMI, which stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI Greater Houston. I have taught, along with my husband, classes for persons who have family members with mental illness challenges. And right now we co-facilitate a family support group for that same audience at Shea Community Center. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you for that, Ms. West. Mr. Bowers?
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Donald Bowers. I'm born and raised in Houston, Texas, Rice University, Hanson College, managerial studies, undergrad major. Lived in Hanson College. As it relates to, what I do for hobbies or extracurricular activities, since about the year 2000, my extracurricular activity has been volunteering at Rice in a lot of different roles and a lot of different ways. I'm married with 2 sons. Neither attended Rice, but they spent quite a bit of time on campus as young people growing up, and I'm glad to be here. Look forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Mr. Bruce?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Akeem Bruce. I am a Lubbock College alum, class of 2019. When I was on campus, I studied statistics, economics, and managerial studies. I now live in Philadelphia. Well, I usually live in Philadelphia. I'm currently back home in Memphis, where I'm originally from. In terms of like all the other family members and such, like I don't have any kids or anything of that nature, but I do plan to foster a cat next year. So that's still waiting. In terms of hobbies, my hobby, I like to say, is just generally food. Like, I like the whole like Yelp, the whole Yelp shebang where, you get to review restaurants and such, and go out to different restaurants because it encourages you to go to places you haven't been. Philly has a pretty good food scene. And then also since COVID-19 has started, I've been trying to teach myself to cook. So that's still a work in progress, but food in general.
You can go to Alicia. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia Burns-Wright, class of 2008, Jones College. I'm originally from Las Vegas, but I am currently in Washington, D.C. Like everyone else here, I am a lawyer. Family, I'm a little closer to Akeem in terms of my family, but I do have a pet. I have a dog named Rufus. If he could go to college when he turned 18, he would go to Rice. Mm-hmm. And for hobbies, I usually like traveling. That's my kind of main thing that I love to think about and plan to do and do. But in COVID, I'm becoming very adept at happy hours with friends over Zoom. So this is a very familiar setting for me. Looking forward to talking about our time at Rice together. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jamila Mensah. I am class of 2000 from Sid Rich. Go Sid Rich. I also was an O-Week advisor at Will Rice. So I sort of sideways as a stepchild, maybe also claim Will Rice, but Sid Rich. And I was an English major at Rice. I also was on the track team, the women's track and field team during my time there. I always tell people, so I walked on to the track team. Anybody who knows anything about Rice track knows how fast everybody is. I was the slowest person on a very fast team, but it was a great experience. I've met some of my best friends doing that. I met my husband at Rice. My brother was at Rice before I was, and then I had a younger brother-in-law and now also sister-in-law who also graduated from Rice. So we are really trying to keep it in the family. I have 2 kids, 2 daughters. We're 13 and 10. One has Rice aspirations. One, pretty sure she can't be bothered, but we'll see. I'm an attorney. I'm a partner here in Houston at Norton Rose Fulbright. I do employment and labor litigation and advice and counsel. Been doing that. After 3 years out of school, I went back to law school because the 3 years between undergrad and law school, I actually worked at Rice in the admission office. So I stayed about as long as I could before going off to law school, and then back on to practice here in Houston, where I've been ever since. Hobbies, a lot of rerun watching. I've slowed down on my King of Queens reruns, which anybody who's ever talked to me knows how much I've watched that show obsessively. I've now seen enough of those that I'm on to something else. These days, I'm back into sports as best as I can be. It's a rough time being a Houston sports fan right now. Astros are looking pretty good. Not so good as of tonight. We'll see how it goes. But I'm hanging in there for the Texans and the Stros and the Rockets, who really broke my heart this year. But we can talk about that on another Zoom. Thanks.
All right, you guys. So thank you for that. I feel like I know you guys a little bit better on a different level. I think we can go to Craig's video, and then we can move on to our questions so that he can introduce himself.
A brief bio of myself. I'm a 1977 graduate of Rice University, and I am from Beaumont, Texas. And I started Rice in 1973. I am a professor of law at Texas Southern University, Thurgood Marshall School of Law, where I've been for 30 years. I'm currently visiting at the University of Houston and teaching a course there, along with my courses at Texas Southern University. I teach international law and I teach constitutional law, among other subjects, usually related subjects. I was a student at Rice in the 1970s, and my residential college was Will Rice College. And my hobby that I really developed, I would say, while I was at Rice, was an interest in jazz music. I love jazz. I listen to jazz much of the time, although I must admit that I listen to classical music the other part of the time. So those are my hobbies: music, primarily jazz and classical music.
All right, you guys. So as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the great things about having such a diverse panel, like we have people from, I guess, like various decades at Rice who are interested in like various extracurricular activities, who have different careers. Some people are in STEM, some people are in business, some people are in the humanities and law. Is that it lends itself to like a layered conversation in which we have diverse voices. So to start us off, I was thinking if you guys could paint us a picture of what it was like for you guys at Rice, or what Rice was like while you were there. So like the overall feel of campus, the racial climate, that type of thing. But I think it would also be helpful if we start this question with Craig, so that you guys can get into the conversation and ping pong off each other, if that's okay. So
one of the questions that I received had to do with the racial climate at Rice back in those days. And I want to be fair, but I also want to be honest about it. The racial climate at Rice in the 1970s was troubling. It was difficult. It was frustrating. It was an overall feel that we were thought of as a guest, and that's something I don't take very well. I don't take the whole guest idea very well today. But as a young person back in the 70s, it was particularly frustrating because Rice was my first experience in an integrated academic environment. I went to all Black high schools and elementary schools before coming to Rice. So Rice was really my first time in an integrated academic environment. And I was always in a majority before I came to Rice. And all of a sudden at Rice, I'm a minority and I am a guest. And I didn't see the logic behind that. So I rejected that notion of being a guest. And Rice had serious diversity issues in the 70s. But more on that in a minute, because I think some of the other questions allow me to reflect on that space a little bit more.
You guys can just jump in when you have something salient to say. I don't want to like point the questions at you unless conversation's not going anywhere and somebody has to answer. Mr. Bowers?
So it's interesting that Craig described it in that way, because as I was thinking about your question earlier, I'm in that second generation, right? So my time, I'm about 10 years younger than Craig and Jan. And so I grew up as schools were trying to figure out integration. And so I had gone to mostly integrated schools and had been in situations where I'd been the only Black student in a class or in a group. And so I came to Rice and I thought a couple of things. One, this is, when I dream about what college is supposed to look like, this is the place. It's just so beautiful. The architecture, the landscaping, it reminds you or gives you that image of what you think college is supposed to be. The racial climate, though, was in transition. So where Craig may have been able to, identify that there were a large group of people who were against him, I think I found a place where there were folks who looked like me, so I was not as isolated as Craig may have been, even though I believe my freshman class only had 30 Black students total. But many of them were student athletes like me, and so I saw them all the time. And then there were a group of students who were advocates, engaging. You didn't have to guess whether they appreciated you or wanted you on campus or not. But then there was this other number that you weren't sure of. And so for me, because I wasn't sure, I decided to be more closed and withdrawn. People who know me would say I'm gregarious and I'm outgoing. But if you were around me at Rice and you weren't one of those people who I relied on or who I had an association with, I did not have much to say to you because I didn't know who you were, what you may have had as a motive, or how you may have thought of me. And so I did not engage. And so it was a very kind of like on and off, like turning a switch, if you will. And people talk about code switching sometimes, but it was definitely a environment where when I was with those people who were within my circle, I could be me. But when I was in the rest of Rice, I felt like I had to keep my guard up.
I'll go next. I listened to what Craig had to say, and I came to Rice in 1969. The climate at Rice in general was, some people would have said, that radical institution. Some people would have called it a liberal institution. But I can remember instances where I heard the students just before Rice admitted Black students had a sit-in the RMC, so that gives you an idea kind of what it was like. I can remember my freshman year, Abby Hoffman with the SDS wanted to come to Rice, and the statement was no, he couldn't come, and we were locked in our dorms for our protection. And I lived on the second floor of Brown College, and it amazed me. I got knocks on the door that night, and there were a steady stream of people saying, may I climb out of your window? Because, you can jump from the second floor, and there they went off. And after all of that, they saw Abby Hoffman. It was the kind of place that was really different. I, like Craig, came from a totally segregated school. I was the only person in Brown College my freshman year. I was probably the only person in a lot of classes my freshman year. I have to say that if I was defining what Rice was like for me, and also I've talked with some of my classmates from the class of 73 and 74 and 75, I think Rice was stunning. As Donald mentioned, it was a beautiful campus. In fact, I thought Rice was, as we drove up, the grounds of the Sisters of Charity's convent, which was odd because I'm not Catholic and I didn't know what my mother was doing, but it turned out, I think that for me, it was soothing to be someplace every day that was simply beautiful. And I guess that's why I worked at Rice on and off for like 30 some years. The other thing about Rice is that it was surprising. I was one of the children that watched other children being tortured by guard dogs and the whole Birmingham bombing. And I saw some of the schools integrated, and it was awful and scary. But I was so determined to leave Port Arthur, Texas, and try something bigger and a larger world that I was coming to Rice no matter what. And I was pleased to see people show up when I got there to move me in, kind of like you do right now. Was it a perfect situation? No. But I have to tell you, for me, if people had been openly hostile, that would not have worked. I would have been really, I would have shut down probably. And I saw Rice as a supportive place. Although at the time, 60% of the university had to come from Texas, the other 40% could come from anywhere else. There were people on my floor who were, there's Karen Nikaido from Hawaii and Nancy Rosenfeld, who was from New York. And between the two of them, I ate matzo ball soup and seaweed. And there were a lot of new experiences for me that were exciting. I also had friends that in Brown College were very supportive. Bart Sinclair, who was the one of the associate deans in the School of Engineering, his wife Diane was a very good friend, is to this day. So I guess personally, I did feel supported. I felt supported by the faculty. I can remember having an 8 o'clock English class. I'm not a morning person, but my high school teacher said, you need to talk and input. And so there I was at 8 o'clock in the morning trying to sound wise, and someone laughed at what I said. And knowing me back then, that would have been the end of it. I would not have opened my mouth ever again. But Robert Cox, who was the English professor, said, first of all, we weren't as bright as this 9 o'clock class. And second of all, if anyone else laughed at anything anybody had to say, there's a drop-ad slip. You need to pick it up because I can promise you, he said, you're going to flunk my class if this happens again. And if it had not been for that, that'd have been it. So I know that sometimes it seems to me that as I tried to grapple with what was different, because once again, it wasn't perfect, it was like you were able to join anything and everything at Rice. You could go to the sherry parties. I don't know if I was old enough to drink. You could go to beer mattress parties in the stadium. I knew that was not a good idea, but you could do many things. But the only thing is, bringing what you brought to the table was not always easy. And I sense that's kind of what Craig was going towards. But as I said, once again, I was so happy to be on campus in a beautiful place with some supportive people that, for me, took the good with the bad. And it was more good than bad.
So I think I'll go next. So I think I figured out the order. If we have Ms. Jan and Craig and then Donald and then me, right smack in the middle, and then Alicia and then Akeem. So when I came in in 1996, well, let me back up. So my brother was at Rice before I was. He came to Rice on a football scholarship. And we're really close. We actually live on the same street today. That is how close we are as grown-up people. And so my goal was, of course, to try to follow him if it made sense at all for me to do that. And so once we figured out he was going to Rice, I figured I'm really close to my family. I was very much a homebody in terms of not wanting to go too far away. So I said, okay, I can stay in Houston. It's a wonderful institution. My brother's there. So I decided as a freshman in high school that I was going to come to Rice, not grasping at all how difficult that might actually be. I just sort of made a decision and pushed forward. My experience with Rice before I actually got to Rice was going to football games, of course, and then coming and spending time with him on campus with his friends. And so the perspective that I got was that there were Black people everywhere because all I hung out with was football players and the people the football players hung out with. And so yeah, I thought, okay, well, they were saying it wasn't that diverse. I literally see Black people every time I come here. So this is it. I'm ready to go. And so when I started, so I was thinking about this earlier today. I started Rice in 1996. which was right the same year as the Hopwood versus Texas decision was decided. So my class came in right before Hopwood, which Fifth Circuit found that schools couldn't use race in admission decisions. I'm paraphrasing, but that's where we were. So when I came in, my class came in, we, I think, had the highest number of Black students ever to matriculate at the same time. I don't remember what the number was. 40 something sticks out to me. It may have been higher than that. But then eventually within the next year, it took a nosedive. I mean, it just, because we were in the situation as an institution where we just, if really talented students of color, Black students in particular, got into Rice and Harvard and a whole bunch of other places, they were likely going to go to a whole bunch of other places. And so we ended up struggling for a little while to get those numbers up. So, but as a student at Rice, during my experience, still had my brother for 2 years. So I felt like I was automatic. I had an automatic group of friends. I didn't have as much of an issue, you know, getting to know people, because I was able to carry that cachet right in the door, which was great. But then I did have to make a name for myself and find my own group. And I did that between the track team and being involved at SID. You know, anybody who knows me knows that I'm kind of in everything, and I'm very much a joiner, and I've been that way. So I tried to do everything that the track schedule allowed me to do. I worked in the library. I did IM sports when we were in off season. I was an O-week advisor. I volunteered for the admissions office. You know, I was just a busybody, and kind of that is my natural personality. And to Jan's point, Rice really allowed me to do that. I felt like I could be whatever I wanted to be in that space. And I don't remember any open hostility. To the extent that I did experience it, it wasn't any different from what I experienced growing up in integrated schools. I grew up in the suburbs in Houston, and my high school was probably a third white, a third Black, and a third something else. And so with socioeconomic diversity probably being broader than racial diversity. And so learning to be around and get along with different kinds of people was something that I figured out before I got to Rice. And I definitely think it served me well. I can't imagine what it would have been like to come from a school that maybe was predominantly one thing or another, and then to show up at a place like Rice, which is different. Even if you're not looking at racial diversity, the people within the races are just very different. And so getting adjusted to all of that was not difficult for me. I don't recall really struggling with it at all. I think it had more to do with personality than anything else, though, honestly, because I did have some friends who did struggle, and I could understand that, and I could sympathize with that. But finding your people, finding your tribe, finding your circle, that's the advice I give everybody, whether they're going to Rice or they're going to do anything else. Once you find your people, whatever they look like, wherever they are within the place, that's how you begin to make a home for yourself. And that's what I did that was successful. So got out of Rice, worked at Rice for 3 years in the admission office, and really got to appreciate it in a different way. Because when you are promoting Rice to other people, to students that you want to attend there, you start to look at it differently. And so my big takeaway from my time in the admission office was all of the things that Rice had to offer that I didn't do when I was a student, even though I felt like I was doing a ton of things. So, for example, I never once made it to beer bike. I know, don't hang me up off of the Zoom. It always fell on some weird weekend that we couldn't do it. And I never, not one time was I able to do it. I really wasn't involved in very many organizations outside of the BSA. I did have some leadership positions in the BSA, but that was really it other than sports. And I never did study abroad, which, I mean, again, if I could just kick myself to this day, you know, thinking if I knew then what I know now, you know, and part of it was that wasn't something like study abroad was not something that was on my radar from my family. I didn't know anybody in my family who had ever done it. It wasn't something that I felt connected to in a way that it seemed like a good idea for me. And I think that had everything to do with whatever experiences and sort of, you know, baggage that I brought into school with me. And so Rice has always been, in my experience, a place that gives you the opportunity to do wonderful things that you've never done before. But the key that I hope I'll hear from Alicia and Akeem, that I hope is better after than it was when I was there, is the ability for people who look like me to really see themselves in all of these spaces and not just in the ones that were familiar for us. So, and then kind of following up on that, my experience at Rice 3 years after graduating, I actually went to law school in the year that the Hopwood decision was overturned, which is 2003. So I really got to see sort of both sides of this. I went into undergrad just before things got bad, and then I went into law school just as they were starting to get good again in terms of what schools were able to do to increase racial diversity and admission. And so, but I will say that my experience at Rice, everything from living in a place as glorious as Sidrich, to being on the track team, to working in the library, and to doing all of the different activities that I had never done before, have prepared me for my actual real life in a way that I don't think I would have ever anticipated. Because what I know that I have now is a seamless ability to fit into nearly any situation, nearly any circumstance, and to not be concerned, particularly if there are not people in that group that don't look like me, because I have experience with that, and I have experience with how to navigate that, and I was given the confidence. I developed the confidence to be able to do that in large part through my experience at Rice.
So it's funny, Jamila, I feel like our situations were very similar in terms of kind of doing everything and our background. I came to Rice from Las Vegas, and my high school was very diverse. If I had to put numbers on it, I would say 50% Hispanic or Latinx, and maybe 20% or 30% Black and 20% other. So my school experience in high school and even before, I was not really majority white. Much like Jamila, but in a different way, I came and visited Rice on Vision Weekend and said, oh, there are diverse people everywhere. This is a very diverse school, so Vision works. And I had a great time at Vision, but was a little shocked when I got to campus as a freshman, because that diversity was very scattered relative to everyone else. I oftentimes wonder how that, maybe I saw what I wanted to see, because I was on campus just like everyone else. I stayed as a prosby, I stayed in someone's room in Brown College, just like everyone else. But it seemed very diverse then, and it seemed not very diverse when I started as a freshman. That being said, I did, as Jamila advised, and I found my tribe. I was very involved in BSA, very at home in the sociology department, where I got my degree, and found all of the professors very welcoming, and they cheered me on when I struggled, in my freshman year. And I was able to kind of like find my footing and get my grades up, but it was really tough, and I felt very supported. Much like Jan said, I felt very supported by a lot of the faculty, not all of the faculty at the time, but I felt very supported over the years by President Lebron. I think he was very supportive of minority students and efforts that we had, and not just Black students, but also LGBTQ students and so on. And a lot of not all of my friends from Rice are Black. A lot of my friends from school are from my college and from other experiences that I had while I was on campus. I will say two really challenging and memories of Rice that unfortunately I'll never forget are during my sophomore year. The back page ran a very racist back page. It was run during Families Weekend, which made it even worse for the parents that were on campus. But the back page basically said, paraphrasing, it said that the cops can have a night off when BSA is having their meetings because they know where we all are. And it said, Asian students don't study more, it's because their eyes are small and they can't see like as well as everyone else. So they have to read twice as long. Like, these were the jokes that were on the back page. The provost at the time was very supportive of the students that wrote that he said it was freedom of speech and that they should be allowed to write what they want and face the consequences. And so that was a really difficult a moment in time. A second really difficult moment in time, sorry, Jamila, was at Sidrich. Sidrich threw a party every year, to my understanding, on Martin Luther King Day. They would throw a party with fried chicken and 40s. And my year, the party, someone got very drunk at the party and they went downstairs, they broke into the college coordinator's office and made a mess of it. And then they wrote, I don't remember what the exact phrase was, but they wrote the N-word on the college coordinator's board. And so that was really difficult to deal with. And again, there was a lot of support from the faculty, from the masters at Sid Rich, the magisters at Sid Rich during the time were very supportive about having open conversation around that. But coming from a really diverse background in high school, and not diverse meaning like not white, just it was very diverse, like across the board. That was really traumatizing stuff, like to have to deal with as a you know, a 19-year-old and then as like a 21-year-old, and knowing that my fellow students were the ones that were doing that kind of stuff and how they thought they might think of me and might think of other Black students and Asian students on campus. So those were really traumatizing moments, but they were 2 moments in time. And I think aside from that, I loved Rice. I had a great time there. I had a great time with the BSA and with my fellow Jonesians and so on. So obviously I'm very invested in Rice. I volunteer a lot, like Donald was saying, and I'm happy to give back. And I'm so proud of how far Rice seems to have come as an outsider kind of alumni, watching the current students and the more recent graduates express themselves. So, but it wasn't all pretty, for sure. There were definitely moments like that had a really lasting effect, I think, on me and other folks that were there when I was there.
So Mark, can I add something here? Because Alicia hit something that I did not mention earlier. So in being from Texas and being from the South and being in that age group that I was a part of, what you ran into, Alicia, is what my parents were preparing us for. And so when I came to Rice and I saw those things, my parents had said, you are there to get the education. That's the thing that all of that extracurricular is trying to keep you from getting this degree. And so you find a way to march through that. But it's a challenge, right? Because you're a young person. You're not a fully mature individual. And it's also a challenge because you're a Black male. I think there's a uniqueness in that. And we had situations where my friends and I, all athletes at Rice, we only have one kind of clothes at that point, which is stuff that has Rice on it, right? We don't own anything else. And we had situations where campus police would stop us and ask us if we belonged on campus. And we were like, what are you talking about, right? And we only had one Black police officer at the early part of that, Sergeant Anderson. And there were several times where Sergeant Anderson would actually kind of advocate for us within his own peers that, hey, those guys, leave them alone. And so I'm interested, Akin, when you tell your experience, if you could talk a little bit about the Black male part of that experience too, because I could go on for a while, but it's your turn.
Of course. So yeah, I'll give you sort of like a broader feel of the campus first. To compare what Alicia was saying with me coming in, when I first came in, I went to Owl Days, so that's everyone. So when I was there, I kind of like I was able to get a taste of like the sort of diversity that Rice had. And my takeaway from it was that, okay, like there aren't a ton of Black people here, but I felt really welcomed while I was there. And I kind of like during that time, like I was really excited to be going to college. I was very excited for that time in life. So yeah, I was just really ready to go to Rice and like was looking for, you know, ways to get there earlier and all that jazz. So I was really excited to, like, what I used to say around that time is that, you know, I felt so welcomed that it went up from number 1 on my list to number 0. Like that's what, but of course, like obviously I ended up coming to Rice. I should say, like, from my background, I am from Memphis, like I said earlier. I think earlier I forgot to mention too, I'm an actuary working out of Philly. I think I forgot to mention I'm actually not a lawyer. So there's a different profession here. I came from a high school that, well, all of my schools growing up, because of like where I'm from, Memphis, ranged from 2/3 to 100% Black. So coming to Rice definitely was still sort of a wake-up call, even though, I had the time from Al days to when I came to Rice to kind of get in that mindset and understand what I was walking into. So because of that, like being Black on campus and like being around, I guess, in an environment where there aren't necessarily like, a group of Black students that you can go back to when like you want to talk about this, or like you're feeling like no one's relating to you about this one thing, like it just felt very differently. But eventually, I also grew an appreciation for, I'd say, the diversity within the Black community as well. Like where I'm from Memphis, like I said, and that's sort of like, de facto, like we have Black people all together because of that. Because of that, all the Black people, a lot of Black people will carry the same characteristics, right? There wasn't really much diversity of religion. Like at Rice, we have a very strong African student and Caribbean student population. There's a lot of factors in the Black community as well that I sort of wasn't thinking about when I entered. But those are kind of what colored my like sort of takeaways from my experience there. In terms of the racial climate, it wasn't so there wasn't very much, I'd say, outwards just direct malice from peers. I'd say the majority of that sort of came from this thing that we call this app called Yik Yak. And around the time when I came to Rice, it was still very popular. And essentially, for those of y'all that don't know, what Yik Yak is sort of an anonymous social media. It's a site where you can anonymously post about something, right? So your name's not on there. No one knows who's saying what. They can't trace it back to you or anything. People can just agree or disagree. Like they can thumbs up or thumbs down, and they can comment on it. So around that, so like during this time, of course, like no one's like being outwardly aggressive, but you could see what people really think when you got onto Yik Yak and really broke down what was going on there. So at some point, we had a demonstration about concerning the events that went down in Mizzou in 2015. Somewhere around there. So we had a long story short, we had a protest on campus, a demonstration on campus. And we got a lot of nasty comments that came from that. And that it's the people that are on campus because it's sort of like, it's confined to a certain range. So you knew that it was coming from the campus. When we have our cultural night events, so like, Africae and Soul Night, you also get comments coming after that. Fortunately, eventually, Yik Yak, debatable, but like Yik Yak eventually faded away. So we ended up losing that portion of, getting to see what people really felt about things. But in general, I would say like there wasn't very much outward, like direct aggression. There were some incidents like from people outside of campus or Mr. Bowers was saying, like just people walking around campus and, RUPD or, some other figure on campus, thinks that you don't go here just because you're a Black person, so we have situations like that. So those would happen still, so those haven't gone away. But in general, most of the direct malice was coming from other places. Or I guess not, it wasn't coming directly from our Rice peers, I should say. In terms of like what I did on campus, I was also sort of like a all over the place type of person, like some of the other panelists were. I was pretty involved in student government, so that's campus-wide government as well as Lovett's government. I was the president of Lovett when I left. I also coordinated orientation week, and I was a week advisor at Martell. So that's kind of like my like step sibling college. I also volunteered with admission, so I'm glad to see that we have other people that have done that too. Few other things, including like including non-majors orchestra and the Black Student Association. Now, I also held some leadership positions within the Black Student Association. So like my experiences were kind of all over the place there. Because of that, my social life was also sort of all over the place there. In terms of the friends that I made when I came in, I came in thinking, okay, I understand that we're divided into 11 communities, but these communities are kind of like arbitrary, right? So who's to say that, your best friend on campus isn't at some other random college? So when I got there, I was like, okay, like I need to enter game mode, figure out who I want to be around, figure out, what friends I want to make, what I want to do, because there's so much more to do in college. Because of that, I ended up with a really diverse friend group as well as like diverse interests there. So overall, I'd say that my experience there I didn't experience a lot of I didn't have a lot of negative experiences because of the color of my skin. I will say though that while I was on campus, there are other members of the Black community that felt more isolated than I did, or felt like their voices weren't being heard, like I felt mine was being heard. And I felt like that had a lot to do with sort of like the community aspect. Rice is broken up into 11 different communities, and mine just happened to work out really well for me. But I will say that feeling was still there. It just happened to not be as much centered around me.
All right, you guys, if nobody has anything to add, I think we can move on to the next question. That was really, really informative. You guys have a range of experiences. All of you are very funny. All right, so if you guys could condense basically what you just said, if you could describe Rice as an institution in 3 words or less, which 3 would you use and how would you describe it? I think this is a hard question if you talk a lot like me, and I think it's kind of hard. So go for it.
I actually shared mine. Stunning, surprising, supportive. It was not what I expected in a very good way, and surprising. I had come to Rice with the notion that kiss A's goodbye, B's goodbye. I'm gonna try my best to make a C, because partly of the stereotyping that came with being Black at that point of time, but also because my high school counselor, who was Black, said, it's nice you got admitted to Rice, but I wouldn't go if I were you, because Charles Freeman, who was the first Black undergraduate male to come to Rice, didn't do well, and why do you think you will do well? She didn't have all of her facts straight. Charles was simply brilliant. I simply was like a little workhorse, and I graduated with honors. And I guess the surprise was that I could compete and that I was a strong student. And so that surprisingly made, I think, Rice a positive experience for me. But I'd say stunning, surprising, supportive.
Samar, my 3 words were yes, Rice can. And what that comes from is there were a group of guys who were in Hanson who were in the rally club. And so at all football games, basketball games, they had this cheer that they would say, yes, Rice can. And it kind of just symbolized that, in those days we were playing in the Southwest Conference. And so we were going up against teams sometimes who had really out-talented us, if you will, in the overall. And this idea that we could do it as a Rice was something that I remember vividly. And when I think about Rice today, those words still resonate with me. Yes, Rice can.
Yeah, mine is kind of similar. So I would say dynamic, challenging, and underdog was a word that came up when I was thinking about this. And for lots of the reasons that Don just mentioned, because it always felt like, especially with sports, that we were just always trying to beat the Giants, always, which we did in 1993. I was there. I saw that game. But outside of that, what I've felt like, and I still feel like out in the world, is that as much as people know about Rice and as prestigious as we are, there is a bit of an underdog reputation in a good way that I feel is really galvanizing for those of us who went to Rice, because we know what we can do and we know what we're capable of, and anyone who's come across our path knows that as well. But people who don't know, they just assume that they think of Rice as this small school in the South, and and they're pretty good, and there's some smart kids that go there, and I feel like it's this secret sometimes that we have, and we just get to keep and use to our advantage, because unless you've actually dealt with a Rice graduate in the real world, you may not know exactly what to expect. And so the sort of pleasant look of surprise that crosses people's faces, sometimes questioning, sometimes curious, sometimes suspicious, But, you know, you give all of the Rice grads that I know, all the people that I spend my time with are the best at what they do. And that's not an exaggeration. And so being able to move in those spaces with other Rice people with this thing that just we share feels like we're kind of sneaking up on people. And I like that about us. I like that about our experience.
I would say my 3 words are defining, ever changing, and I mean that in a really good way, and limitless. I don't think I want to go into, think what you will about those words.
My 3 words, I thought about it from before, and my 3 words were PWI, so predominantly white institution, and I mean that in like in a context of like HBCU versus historically Black colleges and universities versus predominantly white institutions. So obviously, like there are, I should say, predominantly non-Black institution. That's more accurate. But since everyone's going into characteristics, I'll just leave that as one. And then my other 2, I would say it's warm. Like that was that feeling that I got when I went to Aldays, and it stuck with me for my 4 years. And I would also say collaborative. That was something that I really liked about Rice when I was researching colleges, and that still, in my opinion at least, existed throughout my time there.
All right, you guys, I think we'll hear from Craig.
How do you describe Rice in 3 words or less? Well, it's hard enough for me. You can ask my students. 3 words is hard. Limiting anything is hard for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and give you 3 words. Excellent, challenging, apathetic.
I think the fact that he didn't even elaborate just like gives us a little bit of suspense to move into the next question with. So we're just going to keep this ball rolling. All right, you guys. So now that we talked about Rice overall, I think we want to go a little bit more in depth to you guys' like personal experiences, because I feel like the day-to-day can show you a lot about the structure. I think some of you guys have touched on this, like if you guys can remember, like I know it might be like further away for some people or like closer, maybe you have a bad memory like me, but if you can remember why you came to Rice, like it doesn't have to be a long answer, but just like why you chose to come to Rice.
I came to Rice because in my naivete of making really good decisions about college, I had 3 choices. University of Houston, where all my friends went to school, and that's where I wanted to go. But there was no space for me in the dorm. Then there was Lamar University. I'm from Port Arthur. Wanted to branch out, did not want to live at home, wanted to live there on campus at college. And then there was Rice. And when U of H didn't have room for me in the inn, and I kept getting calls from Alan Grove and Bernard Giles, who was the director of admissions, I was like, okay, here I go. And the rest is history.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about mine. The simpler, in addition to my brother, my grandmother lived in 3rd Ward. I grew up splitting, basically half my life on the north side of Houston and the other half in 3rd Ward. So when I figured out I could go to school in Houston with my mom 30 minutes away, my grandmother 15 minutes away, which meant I was going to eat good all the time, and my brother was there with me, and it was a school where smart people went, right? It was like, okay, I feel like this is a pretty good option for me. Now, I think I mentioned earlier, naivete is a great word, Jan, because once I decided I was going to Rice, I didn't apply to go to school anywhere else. It wasn't, which was, thinking back, anybody who was listening who was not yet in school was the single dumbest thing I've ever done. And so I applied to Rice, and then later somehow there was still some opportunity to apply to the University of Houston. So I sort of maybe backdoored my way into a possible backup. But if Rice had not accepted me, for a number of reasons, I don't know where I would be right now, but mostly because it was the result of almost accidentally wonderful decision making.
It can be a bad decision if it worked out.
Well, and there you go. And that's what I keep telling myself tomorrow. So thanks for that.
I applied to Rice because it was a D1 school in a huge city, and I went because of my experience at Vision Weekend.
So I was a recruited student athlete with some borderline options for some larger schools, but I was on a visit to Duke, which was actually the first time I'd ever been on an airplane. And I was in a visit with some of the coaching staff and supporters there, and great experience as far as the Duke campus and the environment, but they said something that killed it. They said, yeah, because you can't go home for Thanksgiving, we all go and do this. And I said, wait a minute. Rice is right where I live. I can see my family for Thanksgiving. And it had the other two things that were super important to me. I've always been a really good student, and so I knew I wanted to go to a school that had a high academic reputation. And then the second thing, my high school graduating class was 190 people. So when you're in a school that's small, everyone is important, right? You can't have a team, a choir performance, or a musical or a play without getting every kid in the school involved. And Rice was small enough that where I felt like if I came to school here, I would find something to get involved with because it's just that small. You are needed. Your presence matters.
I'll say one thing on Donald's point about Thanksgiving. So, those of you, I think Akeen and somebody else mentioned all of our students come from everywhere. And that's particularly true on some of the smaller sports like track and field and some of these other ones. So, talk about not being able to go home for Thanksgiving. These girls could not fly home to Barbados and these other places for these Easter and Thanksgiving holidays. And my grandmother, again, the benefit of having a grandmother so close by in Third Ward in a house that was, probably as big as this room, used to feed, basketball players, track stars, football players who could not get home on these smaller holidays, Easter and Thanksgiving, sometimes on Christmas, in a way that it feels like magic how she was able to come up with enough food to feed all those people. But that, you talk about community and experiences at Rice, that was probably one of the most meaningful, not just for me, but for sure for my friends.
I'll jump in real fast. When I came to Rice, it was a very calculated decision, I would say. I sat down and I just made a really, really long list of like all the things I wanted in school. And then at that time, there was like this app that you could use to like type in the things and then you could research the school on your. But anyway, long story short, Rice had the most of those things. So I like literally was able to calculate like what percent like level, just like, well, how much of a match was this school for me? And it was at the top of my list. And so I ended up applying, I applied early decision and I got in. So that like answered the question for me without me having to, like mind bend myself into a ball, like trying to figure out to try to figure out what I really wanted in the school since it was such a big decision as well. There was something else I wanted to add. It ended up, if I could go back and like in terms of like what I did, I would probably not apply early decision, but I don't regret like the way that I like sort of figuring out what I wanted on the front end, because then I could figure out what I want to put the most weight on. Yeah, I had a pretty prepared answer to that because I was a tour guide.
All right, you guys. So I think we can skip on down. I don't know. I guess I'm just like really enjoying learning about you guys. I feel like we're friends. But I don't know. I'm just thinking about how I applied to Rice. It was very similar to Miss West. I just kind of showed up like, hey, y'all. So I guess my next question is about navigating Rice. Like, what did that look like for you? What is your day-to-day type deal? And I think a lot of you touched on this, but if you haven't had a chance to like tell us about what you all's day-to-day life at Rice looked like, now is the time. So like, where did you find mentorship, community, belonging?
Well, first semester at Rice was very different from the rest of the time because I had read a book somewhere that said for every hour that you were in class, you should study 3 or 4 hours outside of class. So I was studying like night and day and working hard, and just, I guess I did have a little bit of a social life, but it really didn't come into fruition until the second semester. And you also have to know that I probably am not the kind of person who did a lot of partying. We would visit friends back and forth between TSU and U of H, our classmates that were there already. So on a day-to-day basis, I spent a lot of time studying, really finding support from the people, the adults that were there. I think someone mentioned there was one Black professional adult, Dr. Robert Bell. He was a clinical psychologist, and he was hired to come in every Wednesday afternoon, once a week. And so he was a tremendous support. But the people who kind of cheered us on, and I've heard Karen Kasi-Chernyshев talk about this, were the ladies in the kitchen and the ladies who would clean in the colleges. I mean, it was like they were happy to see us there. They were supportive. Miss Annie would take us home to her house and feed us all. Miss Nobles would wake me up. I slept in the lobby of Brown College because my roommate's boyfriend never went home, and I'm hoping she's forgiven me for telling that story again. But so either I was in the way for Miss Nobles, she wanted to vacuum or whatever, but I never missed class because she'd wake me up and send me on. And the second year, there was like an influx of Black students. So there were like 4 Black females in Brown College. And that was a lot of people, because first year there were 3 Black females in my freshman class. And one of them lived off campus, and I was the third one, and the other one lived in Jones College, which was like a million miles away from Brown. So I guess it was a lot of fun. You know, by that time you could do BSU. By the third year of my being there, I found things to do in Brown College that appealed to me. I was internal vice president my senior year, and then I was also an undergraduate research resident associate. And that meant that if you had a problem with your roommate or whatever the situation, you found the person who was on duty, except everybody figured out I was a night owl and they wouldn't wake up the person on duty. So I did a lot of that. Basically, I guess just making our own fun. In between working, I worked a lot to kind of earn extra money and spent a lot of time just really getting to know the Black students on campus as we got more of them. You would have thought that having 30 people in your freshman class and you're a Black female and most of them are male, woohoo, no, not quite. They were all going to U of H and TSU along with us. So, but basically getting to know people and getting to build a community of people, I learned the most important thing was to give people a pass, particularly if they're part of your group. Sometimes we are harder on each other than we are on other people. And I think that it's important to know that those relationships are the relationships that have lasted to this day. I can call my roommate from my 3rd and 4th year at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I know she's going to answer the phone. And she may yell at me for waking her up, but more likely, if I have a problem, an issue, and it's pretty much like Jamila said, there are people who are simply brilliant from across the years that I can reach out to when I want to brainstorm. So that's what life was like for me, spending time with people, working really hard, and getting to really understand how our community functions and how to collaborate and build togetherness.
So I mentioned earlier that my time at Rice was a little bit more, I kept barriers up. And so the example of that is, it's maybe been 15 years ago, definitely as a grown adult, I met a guy by the name of Daniel Bowers. He was in Hanson College at Rice during the same time that I was there. And I never met him, didn't know who he was. And I'm like, how can I if we were standing in the line in alphabetical order, I would be standing behind this guy. And I didn't know who he was, but he knew who I was. And so that's kind of indicative of what my undergrad experience was like. There were close friends, but there was not much more beyond that. And so when you ask the question, where did I find community at Rice? It connects back to what Jamila mentioned with the Hopwood case. I had a friend who was part of a group who was organizing a scholarship fund to try to offset these impacts from the Hopwood case. So in addition to looking at race and admissions, it also prohibited looking at race and scholarship funding. And so this group created a separate scholarship fund called Rice TMS. And they asked me if I would help read admissions applications for students who were applying. Hispanic and African-American students was what the scholarship was for. And so I reluctantly went up on this thing at the request of my friend, who was also a Rice alum. And it was a Saturday meeting times. And so I took my kids with me. They were about 10 and 8 years old. And I'm going through this process of reading these applications, and I'm there with Hallie Poindexter, who was a professor in health and human performance, Dr. Ed Cox, Carl McDowell, who had been special assistant to the president at Rice. And what I'm realizing is that all these things I thought about people who were not advocates for diversity or inclusion, or who didn't care whether I was there or other Black students were there, were spending their Saturday mornings because they cared about this deeply, right? And not only did they care to just read applications, but they put money into this fund. They didn't ask me for any money. They just wanted me to come and help with the reading. The other thing I realized is that my kids were benefiting from the process that I was involved with as a volunteer. I had never met or knew a college professor when I was growing up. And here it was, my boys were getting muffins and donuts from Hallie Poindexter and finding this place about Rice and about this academic excellence and not being intimidated by it. I liked what I saw. I liked what I was a part of. And so I just started to find other ways. So something you didn't ask us, Samar, was what did we know about Rice's segregation or previous history before we got to Rice? I just knew that there was a history, but I didn't know any details. So after I spent this time on this group and started getting involved in other groups, I learned that, hey, Jan West came to Rice and there was no BSA when she got there. Her peers helped create a BSA and it was called BSU, right? And then you learn about who those other, players were on the football teams, on the sports team. So you learn about Staley Vincent and Rodrigo Barnes, and then my brother-in-law Jeff Rose, who was, somewhat, even in my own family, kind of standing off somewhat iconically. And you're like, oh wow, so Jeff is the first Black Alumni Association president. And what does that influence and what does that mean? And so my community has been way more active as an alum because I see all these opportunities to learn more about the Raymond Johnsons of the world and what they've gone through, and to also ensure that they get recognized, right? If we don't take ownership of their recognition, we might find ourselves frustrated because someone else is not doing it. And so that's kind of where my community fit is in, Samara.
I wanted to add to Donald. You're absolutely right. I think Donald and others have been part of this push to keep the history of Blacks at Rice alive through the Young Gifted and Black documentary for the centennial, and then more recently, the exhibit at the Gregory Library. I think it's important to really map out history and understand how it accurately happened. Because I thought Charles Freeman and Jacqueline McCauley were the first two Black students. Then I met Raymond, and people thought different things. And I think it's important to know why people came and what their experiences were like. I was fortunate to speak with Jacqueline when she was she was in Australia just this one time, but it's an awesome feeling to know why she came to Rice and why she left Rice. And I think it's important now that she's no longer with us, she passed in August, that we have a sense of kind of the total family of Black people. And it's an awesome group, just special. And it's important that we preserve that history accurately.
So briefly my experience, I'll pick a day, typical day towards the end, because that's when things start to get really busy. So junior, senior year, I was a morning class person, so an English major and almost history major, but I took so many history classes that I probably should have thought that through and just doubled. But I would start at 8 o'clock classes if they were available, definitely 9. And I would get through those. There'd be a break at around 11, which was, so the time that I was at SID, there was a good number of Black students who were also at SID. And when it was time to pick rooms, we tried to all pick our rooms on the second floor. So there was a period between my sophomore and junior year where almost every Black person, if not every Black person at SID, were all on the second floor, which I thought was hilarious. We sort of segregated ourselves on purpose, but it worked out nicely because you could just take the stairs and you didn't have to wait for the elevator. It was really slow. So we would come in and try to schedule our classes for the most part where we all had some sort of break between 11 and 12, because that's when Young and the Restless came on. And so no matter who was watching the TV, no matter what was going on, and this was like the big football players were coming in here, turning off Mario and telling everybody to turn it to Young and the Restless at 11 o'clock every single day. I mean, we got to see what Victor Newman is up to all the time. So we did that almost every day at SID, and people would come. It got to be a thing. People would come from other colleges and catch a few minutes of the drama, and then we do afternoon class, and then track practice was at 3 o'clock, usually 2.5 to 3 hours, and that was 6 days a week. And then after that, when I was a vice president and then president of BSA, we had a really strong push to make sure the athletes, particularly the football players, either got back involved in BSA or stayed involved in BSA. So what we would do is we would schedule BSA meetings for in Sammy's right after training tables. So the guys would come in from football practice, they would eat. I would go make the rounds in the RMC to make sure that they knew the meeting was happening, and then sort of escort them as soon as they finished eating. All they had to do was come downstairs to the BSA meeting. There was no gap. We didn't lose anybody. And so we really were able to get a lot of participation strategically through good peer pressure and making them come straight down to the meeting. And, in terms of BSA was probably it was the thing I was most active in outside of just regular track practice, and really helped shape my experience at Rice. Jan and Don mentioned history. So Soul Night is something that has been at Rice for a long time. I was part of the BSA class that started Soul Night. I think it was 94 or 95. Our first Soul Night, we actually had some local celebrities at the time who came in and performed with us. One in particular was Paul Wall, who, if you know anything about Houston rap, to know that he actually performed at Rice's Soul Night back then is a very big deal. And so is it not a big deal? Thank you very much, Alicia. And so but part of that actually was through a partnership. So my brother was the president of BSA right before I was. And what we decided to do was try to reach out to TSU and U of H and the fraternities and sororities on those campuses to help bring more Black people onto our campus to see that we're here too. And we don't want to just come to y'all's parties. We want y'all to come to our parties too. And so we actually did a series of Alpha and Kappa parties on campus at Rice, bringing in the U of H students and the TSU students all during that same time period. And it really fostered some really good relationships, I think, across the schools in the city. And so, really trying to figure out a way for us as Black students to feel comfortable in our own space, but to also, try to make a name for ourselves in the city that's dominated by, schools with really strong Black undergraduate populations. And that was, we wanted people to look at Houston. If they're thinking about Houston and Black students that go to college in Houston, that Rice was definitely on the list along with the other schools.
I didn't know that story, Jamila. Thank you.
All right,
And I'll jump in with mine. I talked a lot about mine earlier, like where I found community and such. So I won't dive too much into it. I think I didn't hit on the mentorship part. Earlier in my Rice career, I realized I wanted to be an actuary, so I sought mentorship outside of Rice in general. Eventually, I started looking more, like getting more interested in what I was studying. So I did eventually get a professor to be a mentor, but that's later on down the line. But yeah, in general, my social life was kind of all over the place.
All right, you guys, I think we're going to head over to the audience questions. Thank you so much for asking all of these questions. Like, you guys don't understand, there was like a million questions and everybody just graciously went through and answered them one by one. I think this audience question is very similar to like one of the questions I sent you all earlier about current events at Rice. So let me pull it up. I'm not quite sure who asked it. I think it's Julie. They asked about the sit-in at the William Marsh Rice statue, and I think that's very similar to some of the comments that Donald made and also Miss West about knowing Rice's history. So I guess, what are you guys' perspective on current events at Rice with regards to race relation, with regards to the Black student experience as an alumni?
Go ahead, Ms. West.
One of the things that I've noticed across the years are those things that are most important to the Black community at Rice, regardless of experience, tend to show up over and over and over again. More Black faculty, more Black students, a safe place to be, and a safe and engaging place. I think that I'm far enough away to say that I can't tell students how to think and would never even think of doing that. But the one thing I can say about whatever activism that occurs is be very resourceful and in-depth about why you're doing whatever you're doing. And if you do that, then I think it will lead you to a good solution, whatever that might be for you. But I think that we have to look long-term to see if what we want is to make Rice a more engaging, impacting, comfortable place for the Black community. We need to spend some time understanding what has happened before in Rice's history, understanding what has happened in the greater overall community of this nation, and what that means as far as solutions are concerned.
I just wanted to jump in real quick on that because my answer actually hits off of Miss West. I also, to give you the opposite perspective, like me having graduated like a year and a half ago, I still feel like, you know, students at Rice change over so fast. Well, I mean, at all colleges, but like they change over so fast. And obviously, like, you know, and especially like right now in 2020, like, you know, the dynamics there are very different from when I graduated. So ultimately, my take on the whole situation is that, like, ultimately, if the Black students on campus like feel that way now, I wasn't necessarily thinking about it when I was there. But if they feel that way now, then that's something that they should take on.
I agree. And I love this question specifically when it comes to the statue, because I agree with Akeen. I didn't think about that statue. I took pictures of it. I thought it was cute when they put little bunny ears on it and all of that. And I mean, I did kind of know the history to some degree. I mean, it was what it was and it didn't really bother me. And so when I first started to hear about calls to remove the statue, I was like, what? You know, I think I met it with a lot of skepticism. Like, I was like, I don't know, who cares, you know, whatever. And it really led me to this humongous epiphany, actually, about the fact that I was really centering myself in that ask. And I'm not on campus. I don't walk past that statue every day anymore. Even if I do, like, what is it to me if the statue is gone? And so I am really proud of all those students that feel that way and are saying that they feel that way, and I support them wholeheartedly. And I think it's great. And I love that we have the internet so I can follow the conversation all the way from DC.
Well, as a member of the task force, I'm going to reserve a opinion on the statue itself. But I will say this, I think what we've learned even through this call this evening is how through each generation, Rice has reached more towards its ideals of being the kind of institution that it's supposed to be, right? You know, from where Jan and Craig started to where Alicia and Akin see Rice, it has transformed in so many ways. And in my lifetime, there's some very simple things that didn't seem like much along the way, but I look back at it now and I say, wow, look at this Rice. You know, like Jan said, there were very few Black professors and staff administrators and support system people who were African American on campus during our times in the 70s and even my times in the 80s. As we look back on history, I found out one of my classmates actually was the first Black baseball player to letter. This was 1987. You know, so we were very much in a place where Rice was trying to figure itself out. And so I look back 32 years ago, I was a student worker and electrician's helper in the building and grounds department that summer. And Russell Price was a supervisor or a manager in the facilities department at that time over the electricians. As time went on, Rice developed a program where Rice staff members could actually attend Rice. And so Russell actually became more than just a boss and a friend. He became a fellow alum through Rice's progression this way. I think he was actually the first staff member to graduate from this program at the Jones School. And so then I looked to 2018, when I joined the Rice Board of Trustees, I got confirmed to be on the Building and Grounds Committee. So I went from being the kid turning the light bulbs and helping the electricians to now being part of the team that makes decisions on all Rice buildings over $1 million or more in cost, right? And so it takes me back to this Yes Rice Can, right? And also to the fact that, as Alicia said, each successive generation is going to challenge us to live up to those ideals and those fundamentals that we've talked about. And so in that context, I think the students are pushing us, right? And so then we have to find ways to live up to our ideals.
But I would also like to push the students. You have something that we dreamed of, the African American Studies Center. So use it. I mean, take some time out of what your regular classes are to really understand what is happening in society. I'm not saying that you're clueless, but I'm saying that it takes study to understand some things. There are some things I didn't understand about my culture and background until I took a Black history course at Rice my senior year and heard slave narratives and talked about lynchings, because my dad never talked about that, although he talked about Black history. It's like, be thorough in your decision making. That's what I encourage.
And I guess
I don't have much.
Is stay on this learning journey with us, right? You know, the task force is putting together lots of great forums and opportunities for people to increase their knowledge and understanding, right? And I think every student, every alum, anybody who really has a Rice in their heart should be connected to this and be on this learning, be a part of this learning process. Sorry, Jamila.
That's okay. I don't have much to add. I echo what most everybody said, especially Alicia's point and Akeem's point about, you know, where I was in my time at Rice. Willie statue was not something that I really gave much thought to. But I also know that I wasn't at Rice at a time when things are when there's such a reckoning going on everywhere on these issues. And so I can just say in my own life now, there are ways, there are feelings that I've expressed, and there are thoughts that I have, and there are ways that I'm thinking about things in my personal and professional life that frankly I wasn't really articulating, before, because we are at the point now where things that maybe didn't seem to matter before now matter a lot, or you're giving yourself space to feel and to be honest about how you feel about things. That comes with growth. I say that to say I don't know how I would feel about this if I were a student at Rice right now in these days right now. But what I do know is nobody can tell me in the space that I'm in now, as a corporate attorney at a gigantic global law firm, living in Houston, Texas, trying to raise 2 daughters, with a husband and a brother and a lot of other Black men that I care about in my family. Nobody can come to my space right now and tell me how I should or shouldn't feel about things that I think need to change or that I think need to be different. And so to everybody's point, I think we're all willing to listen and to hear and to help where we can. But I agree that it's the people who are walking this walk right now, the students who are walking this walk right now, you dig in and you do your research and you figure out how you want to approach it, and let us know how we can be part of the conversation.
Thank you for that. All right, so you guys, I think we have officially reached the end of our time here. So I think if you guys have to go, I know everybody has to skedaddle on Central Time because the vice presidential debate is 8 p.m. tonight. And I think we should probably all tune into that. But there was one more audience question that if you guys wanted to add some final thoughts on, which I think that this is kind of more or less the point of the panel. What can Rice do, whether that's a community sense or an institutional sense, to improve the Black student experience or to improve its relation to race or Blackness, just in your opinion, if you have an opinion?
My opinion really quickly is to continue doing the things that Rice is doing right now. Craig mentioned in his video, one of his words that he would used to describe Rice as apathetic. And I definitely think that word describes how the response to what these sorts of events may have been in the past. But today, again, I use the word reckoning because it's happening everywhere. And frankly, and I'm speaking directly to the students now, there are people who are listening now and people who are acting now and people who are willing to act now across spectrums, not just at Rice, but generally who weren't doing that before and who weren't in a space to do that before. And the momentum that you all have to decide what you think is best for you to have a good experience at Rice, the ears and the attention that you have of people like President LeBron and other folks who are in a position to help you, Provost DeRoche, everybody who is focused on trying to make sure Rice can do its part in this piece. Take full advantage of that. Don't think that it's going to come again. And I don't mean that as a warning, but now is the time. The time is today to have these conversations, to have these discussions, to make your feelings known, and to be willing to work with those who are willing to work with you to help change the experience. And so I know that I'm trying to do that in my professional life and other aspects of my life where this issue has come up, and I encourage everybody to continue doing the same.
I agree with Jamila. Rice to continue to do those things that make it an institution that's comfortable for all students, but particularly for Black students, things like the First Gen programs. I've seen some awesome things coming out of career development, no matter what your major is. So I want to encourage students to look at the Doer Institute and the entrepreneurial program that's available. There are so many things available. I encourage you to remember that part of going to college is to not only go to class, that's very important, of course, but to experience all of the things that are possible for you to experience. So I want to encourage the university to continue to do those things. And I think it is finally very important to remember why you came to Rice, not because of what you didn't have, not because of a quota, not because of a deficiency, but you came, for example, 1 year when there were 27,000 people. There's a brilliance and a brightness about you that was able to come off that page. Remember that every day that you go to class, that you interact with people. And I want to encourage the university to support with the different programs that you have, the creativity and the brilliance of the young people who've been entrusted to your care. I see the university doing this. I encourage more, and I encourage our students to take advantage of whatever opportunities are out there.
All right, you guys, thank you for that. And I think that's our time. So
Hey, I got one, Samar.
go for it.
I got it. I say, so exercise your citizenship, since we're talking about the debate coming up. Exercise your citizenship. And part of that is get involved. Joseph Callier was a former student athlete who just happened to be present when I was a student. And so as I thought about being an attorney, I asked Joseph if I could come and visit his office. And he was successful in deterring me away from the field of law. But I never forget the fact that he was open, right? And he was a citizen at Rice. He was present at Rice. And it gave me an opportunity to test that with somebody who looked like me. And so as I've had the opportunity to go back on campus, I try to extend that same kind of opportunity to others. And I think, you'll spend 4 years at Rice as an undergrad, but you will spend your entire life as an alum. And there's so many ways for you to contribute, learn more about your school, be able to help and, direct and, make sure we achieve the ideals and the things that we say that we're about, right? And, but that comes with exercising your citizenship and being part of the group. And so Aruba is open, right, Jamila? We actually have some openings on the Aruba board right now for folks that want to apply. So don't overlook that.
Thank you for the plug, Donald Bowers. I can always count on you. Those of you who are interested, the information is on the Aruba Facebook page and the Rice Aruba page on the Rice Alumni page. We're looking for good volunteers. Those of you who used to be in BSA leader positions, this is a natural fit for you. I too was a BSA president. Now I am an Aruba chair. It's the circle of life. So please do sign up.
If I see anybody who fits that description, I'm sure they'll let them know that they should apply. But Akeem, did you have anything before we go? I saw you unmuted before Donald.
Yeah, what was I saying? Oh my gosh. Okay, wait. Oh, right. If there's something that Rice should do, I would say keep in mind, I would say in order to really get a feel for what is needed in the Black community and what people actually want is going to take direct and it's going to take direct effort. There's always going to be issues that, people are especially vocal about. There's always going to be especially vocal students, and they're going to bring up some of them. But in order to really get a feel for what the Black community wants and needs, you got to take into account the fact that one of the problems that the Black community faces at Rice, or at least when I'm sure nowadays as well, is that, if a portion of the community feels isolated, then they're going to be harder to reach naturally, if that makes sense. So it has to be direct effort, especially since the Rice community, the Black community is so diverse within itself.
All right, you guys, now we're actually going to go watch the vice presidential debate. This has been fun. I've enjoyed sparing. Wait a minute, y'all didn't include me in on this. Okay, this is right. But I've really enjoyed this conversation with you all. Thank you all to the audience. Thank you all to the task force co-chairs. Thank you all to the president's office. I've enjoyed it. Bye, you guys. I think we're logging on off.